What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and today I wanted to do a video that is extremely important, to me at least. It's something I've struggled with for many years, and have finally found a solution for my fish landing problems, and that is choosing between a straight shank hook for flipping, pitching, and punching, which has been the most popular style of hook for those techniques, and also the EWG hook, which was originally the hook that most people flipped and pitched with, and so I've been struggling with this topic for many years, and I've had a terrible hooking percentage with one of these designs, and now I've really got over that. I found the hook design that I love and that works for me. And this right here is my hook box. This is where I have all of my Hayabusa hooks. In this box, I've got a ton of different types of designs and hooks that are specially made for certain techniques. But one hook that you will not find in this box is a straight shank flipping hook. And I'm going to get into the reasons why you won't find a flipping hook that's a straight shank design in my tackle box, and a little bit of backstory. So straight shank hooks have been really popular for flipping and pitching, especially when paired with a snell knot. A lot of people love to snell a straight shank hook because it theoretically makes that hook pop up, and people believe that increases the hooking percentage. And I'm not here to say which one's better or worse for you or somebody else. I'm here to tell you what I've experienced and what works for me, because really it comes down to, it's not just the terminal tackle design that you have to think about. It's also the way that you fish. It's the way that you set the hook. It's the timing at which you set the hook, and also how you fight a fish that really matters. And so that's the first thing I want to mention, is the fact that there's going to be a lot of hate on this video. People commenting about, well, the straight shank works perfect for me. I have a great hooking percentage with that, and then the EWG, I have a terrible hooking percentage. But that's not what I'm trying to accomplish, is tell you which one's better for everybody. It's just my experience. So that's a little disclaimer. So essentially, before we get into it, this right here is the hook that I use nowadays. This right here is a Hayabusa 959. It's a EWG hook, so it's got that extra wide gap, and it's got a heavy gauge wire build. So it's really well suited for flipping and pitching with heavy fluorocarbon lines and also braided lines. This is my go-to for pretty much any situation where I'm fishing a thicker body bait and flipping, pitching, or even casting long distances into heavy vegetation or heavy cover. The 959 is by far my most used hook in my tackle box, and it's the only hook that I will use for flipping and pitching and punching with soft plastics or Elastec baits. And so let's get into the kind of experiences that I've had with straight shank and then EWG. And so right around like the 2005-2006 time period, the straight shank flipping hook was really becoming popular. People were really leaning towards straight shank and starting to snell those hooks, and that's great. I mean, everybody was really starting to get on that bandwagon, and I was no different. I completely dropped the EWG style hook for flipping and pitching because everybody was talking about the straight shank hook and how superior it was at flipping and pitching and those heavy cover techniques. And I could see the logic behind it. Everything made sense. Everything people were saying. I mean, the straight shank hook just looks like it has a better hooking percentage, and it also seemed like that snell knot would make that hook pop and get those fish every single time. So what I started to experience, and it's funny because I look back on it now, I'm like, why didn't you change back to an EWG as soon as you started having problems? But I look back, and you know, back then I'm living in Florida. Flipping and pitching is and punching is my main bread and butter way to cash checks in tournaments, and I'm losing a ton of fish. And I got to the point where I would just assume that I would lose one of my biggest bites of the day, which I hate to say that. I mean, that's a really bad mental space to be in. But I was really pessimistic because my landing percentage was bad, and I didn't really think it was the hook design. I didn't think it was the straight shank design. I thought maybe it was my hook set, you know, how was my hook set? So I started perfecting those things, and then I started thinking about the size of the hook. And you know, when I first started, you know, a traditional, you know, beaver style bait like the Z-Man palmetto bugs, I'd probably use like a 5/0 hook. Okay, and so eventually I was just like, well, maybe I need to upsize. And I ended up at one point, I remember fishing a BFL and getting so frustrated with losing fish flipping and pitching that I switched to a 7/0 straight shank hook. This thing was a gaff. It was huge. And so I switched to that giant hook, and I was only using a little cricket. So the cricket, you know, the little soft plastic that I was using was like this big, and the hook was so big that it was actually longer than the bait itself, and then the point of the hook just kind of narrowly, you know, wedged into the nose of the bait. And my hooking percentage obviously got even worse, because I think what happens when you use a bigger hook is that when that fish chomps down on that bait, when it initially eats it, that hook will rotate sideways because they're putting so much pressure on it that it rotates sideways. It doesn't just tuck into the bottom of their mouth. And so when I'd set the hook, there would be nothing there, or I'd hook it just on the, you know, the skin of the lips or something like that. So my hooking percentage was terrible with that. And then I went down to like a 3/0, you know, real small, because I was also concerned about the hook actually hooking into grass. That seemed to happen a lot with straight shank hooks. Is, you know, I'd hook the fish, but it would also hook into the grass a lot too, and then I'd end up losing the fish. And the smaller hook sizes ended up increasing the landing percentage a little bit, but overall it was still terrible. I was still losing probably, I would say, 40% of my fish. So I struggled with this for years, and I had like a 6-year period where I was just distraught. And like I said, I was in such a bad mental state as far as when I set the hook on a fish, flipping and pitching with that straight shank hook, that I just assumed that something was going to go wrong, which is not the way you want to be. But recently, last year, actually, so the beginning of last year, I was finally fed up. I had another professional angler. I'm not going to mention his name, but he is a well-known flipper and pitcher, well-known puncher. But he said to me, because I was expressing my frustration with this fish losing issue, and he said, "You're using straight shank, right? Maybe you should make the switch back to EWG." And he opened my eyes. I was like, wow. I mean, it's such a simple solution to my problem, is switch back to the hook design that I never had a problem with to begin with. And so since then, I took his advice and started flipping, pitching, and punching again with the EWG style. I primarily used a 4/0 and 5/0. Won't go any higher than that unless I'm pitching something really, really big. But my hooking percentage and my landing percentage went through the roof. Okay, and one of the key things that happened is the way I was hooking these fish and the location that these fish were being hooked. With the straight shank, what I noticed was a lot of the fish that I was hooking, and even if I'd land them, it was hooking them right through the nose, right through the top of the mouth, and around their nose, around their skull. And what I noticed is when you hook a fish in that top portion of their mouth where there's a lot of bone, is that when that fish is fighting and you know, just trying real hard to get off, it'll wallow out a hole in that bone. That doesn't happen in muscle. It happens in the bony areas of the mouth. And so what would end up happening is I'd wallow out that hole, and with the big weights that I'm flipping and pitching with, that fish could throw that hook a lot easier. Now, sometimes I'd catch them with the straight shank on the corner of the mouth, you know, and in strong places, and sometimes, you know, I'd have to get the pliers out, or, you know, slap that hook to pop it out of that fish's mouth. So I'm not saying that every fish that I hooked with a straight shank was hooked poorly, but the majority of the fish would be hooked, you know, in that bony portion where I could wallow out that hole. So that was a problem that I didn't really recognize. I recognized it, but for some reason or another, never made the adjustment to fix it. So that's my bad. But when I switched back to an EWG last year, prior to the Harris chain event at the MLF Pro Circuit event, where I ended up finishing 6th, once I made that switch to the EWG, the 959, my landing percentage went from, you know, 60% landed to almost 100% landed. And of course, you know, it depends on the day, how the fish are biting, and so on and so forth. But since then, I have not lost more fish than I think is probably appropriate for the conditions. You know, the type of cover I'm fishing, what type of you know, how hard it is to get those fish back to the boat through the cover. I've had a tremendous improvement in my landing percentage. If you watch the video I did on the Harris chain tournament breakdown, I am boat flipping every single fish, and every single fish seems to be hooked just perfect. I mean, I was catching, you know, 7-pounders and pulling them over limbs and through pads and things like that. A situation where I would just as soon assume that I was going to lose a fish with a straight shank. I was finally catching those fish with the EWG. Okay, and one of the reasons why, for me, the EWG is a much better solution, and it is because it hooks them in places in the mouth that they cannot pull out from. So for instance, like I said, with the straight shank, top of the mouth, right around where the you know, the skull is, and it can wallow it out. With the EWG, it seems like every fish that I catch, or the majority of them, gets hooked in the cheek. Now the cheek, when you hook a fish in the cheek, the point of the hook is coming out back here. That fish is not coming off because the cheek is just full of muscles. It's full of muscle, and it's just a very dense part of the mouth. And when you hook them like that, you're going to get them in the boat unless you break your fishing line. And so that's one thing that, and also because you're hooking them in that very tough portion of their mouth, it's also not leaving a whole lot of gap left for that hook to be able to hook into cover. One of the biggest problems fishing around wood or reeds or anything that is very, very strong, you know, any type of cover that hook can hook itself into. With the straight shank, I was hooking into, you know, the bushes that I was flipping, or the reeds. You know, as soon as those fish started fighting, that hook would also hook into the cover I was fishing. Huge issue. And with the EWG, there's just not enough gap left because of where they get hooked for those fish to come off, because it gets hooked snagged in whatever I'm fishing. So that's a big factor that made me realize that I'm on the right track with this. So that's the reason why I've switched back to the EWG. Again, I want you guys to take this video with a grain of salt, because this is not a video to say this is the best design. I mean, the EWG may not be the best solution for you, but if you're one of those anglers that has a similar hook set to mine, and my hook set is not as ferocious as a lot of guys out there. I don't hit them, you know, crack them that hard. My hook set is kind of a delayed, just kind of pull into the fish. I mean, I give it to them, but at the same time, I'm not like hitting them so hard that, you know, a lot of guys, I'm so amazed that their line doesn't break on every single hook set. So my hook set may have a huge part in the reason why I lose so many fish on a straight shank hook. But all I'm saying is that you owe it to yourself, if you're losing a lot of fish flipping and pitching and punching, you need to look at the EWG. a different style of hook, and at least give it a try, because if you're having those problems, it may just be the same exact kind of issue that I've been having for all these years, and you might have to switch to the EWG. So that is exactly why you will not find a straight shank flipping hook in my tackle box anymore. And I can tell you what, I've never been happier with the amount of fish that I'm putting in the boat when I'm fishing a flipping and pitching tournament. And it's made me a lot of money. I've made money in the last 2 years that I wouldn't have made with the straight shank. And that's my personal opinion. And I know I'm gonna just get hammered in the comments about this, because so many people just love straight shank hooks and snelling those hooks for flipping, pitching, and punching. And if you do, stick with it. If it works for you, I don't want to change your mind. But this one right here is for the guys that have the doubts about the straight shank flipping hook versus the EWG. All right, so thank you guys for watching. I really want to hear your comments on this. So comment below with your take on this topic. It's controversial, I know, and I also want to hear your stories about flipping and pitching with one design over the other, and your hooking percentage and landing percentage. So other than that, thank you guys for watching. Make sure you subscribe to my channel if you like this video. I really like putting out these videos. I'm trying to put them out almost every other day, if not every day, and I would also like to hear what topics you would like to see in my next video. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you out on the water.